Hello! A couple of interesting products from FXT today, but before we get into it, a quick reminder to like or dislike this video if you didn't like it, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and click the bell icon to find out when I'm uploading videos. Also, always take the red pill just to find out how deep the rabbit hole goes, because at least most of those will really help me out. But anyway, back to the video. Today, we've got two things from FXT. We've got the Mars Pro V2, which is obviously an FPV camera, and previously I reviewed the Venus Pro, which was another camera by them, similar in spec although a micro size, and a couple of interesting things about this because it's CMOS, but it goes on about being jello free and having good WDR, and on here it says the aspect ratio is 4:3 and it is a PAL camera, although on the website I noticed it said it was switchable in terms of aspect ratio and whether it supported PAL or NTSC. So it'd be interesting to see how it works when we actually get there. Just opening up inside, it is a 2.1mm lens, and the actual camera itself looks like this. I'm quite a fan of how they've constructed the case for this because it's got the two holes either side, which really makes for a secure mounting. It has onboard OSD, and you've got a pinout on the back there, which I'll quick close up to. And you can power it normally with anywhere between 4.8 and 36 volts, and it will read your voltage. Or you can put, if you were supplying like 5 volts to this, you can put a separate cable into so it will read your voltage and you can show that on screen. This is probably going to go into this quad, my sort of experimental quad, mostly because it's missing a camera at the moment, which has an OSD already. But I'll have a look at the OSD things before I do that. But aside from this, in the box, which is the camera itself, you get in this little pack 3 different connector cables. This looks like the one that has the OSD fly lead and some bits to connect there, and these look different. We'll figure out what they're for later. Got a couple of different types of mounts depending where you're putting it and how you want to put it in there. Some mounting hardware screws, the little OSD board to actually change the settings, service card, and a specification which has literally a specification on it, which also says that it's switchable between NTSC and PAL and switchable on the aspect ratio, so we'll test it out. But the other thing we got was this thing, which confused me at first. It is, they describe it as an FPV USB cable, and what it is, it seems to have quite a specific use. It is this cable, quite long. One end you've got a USB lead, other end you've got a sort of DC jack plug. Now the weird thing about this is it's like a step-up converter. So the idea is you plug in here like a power bank, and obviously USB has 5 volts. Then in this bit it boosts the power up to 9 volts, so it's labelled here very clearly 9 volt output, so you don't get confused. And I was like, well, what is this for? Normally USB devices want 5 volts. Basically they've built it for goggles. FXT makes the FXT Viper goggles, and this is kind of what it's intended for. Obviously you can plug it into Fat Sharks and things like that. Personally, I tend to have a bunch of little 2S batteries about this side, which I can shove in the side of my Fat Sharks, and I make up a little adapter cable. But yeah, you can run this and run all sorts of things. I mean, again, Fat Shark wise, it also uses the balance lead to power the fan. But for different types of goggles that take 9 volts, this may be of use to you. Yeah, we'll check that out as well, but let's get this camera installed first and see how it looks. So before we actually installed it in the quad, we just turned it on to see what was happening, and here's the default display where it does show the voltage and the call sign there in the middle and the timer, with the other bits on the top sort of going away. So I was just having a quick look through to make sure it was set up okay, but I have to say I had quite a hard time seeing exactly where the menu bar was when I had the lens cap on like this. That really does create a lot of noise with the lens cap on. So I decided to take it off, and I'm afraid you'll have to put up with the amount of crap all over my floor where I was working, just so I could see what I was doing. So I won't go through every possible option you've got here. I mean, most of them are quite well known. You would have seen them before, and I think I went through them in the last camera I did. There's a whole bunch of options to sort out your view exactly as you like it. But obviously what I wanted to do as well is get rid of some of that information on the camera, because I'd have my own OSD. So I then went into the other option to mess with that OSD display. So it's pretty straightforward stuff we've got here. We've got the call sign, we've got the alarm, and we've got the type of scene, as well as the amount of WDR you want to put on that scene. And so most of the things we just simply wanted to turn off. The name, the time, the power, the horizon was already off. And the system is the one we could adjust, and that would change it between PAL and NTSC and 16:9 to 4:3. Now I realised that in 4:3, of course, recording through the DVR, where it records in the same resolution, it looks a bit weird. It looks like it's just sort of stretching around. But it wasn't. Once again, with this camera, 16:9 does make a very pleasant addition to seeing some extra detail and getting the full benefit if you've got a 16:9 pair of goggles, as I have. But anyway, those turned off, I then installed it in the quad. So this is how it went in. I've used both screw holes on the side there to make it really very secure. Most quads now have a similar sort of mounting, but you've got various options going to the bottom and stuff if you want to. And you'll notice I've got that inner plate there because the actual frame plate is quite a bit wider than the camera, and that additional plate on the camera allows me to get a bit more room there. And as you can see, the tilt is reasonable but not outrageous. Now I did try and go to the field to record a little bit of talking about what I was going to do. I'd forgotten my GoPro mic and it was blustery, and all you had is wind noise here. The only thing I wanted to talk about is the sun position. It's just coming up to midday, and this is how high the sun gets. So a really good torture test for this sort of camera, where the sun is very low in the sky like that, it will often produce a very darkened image on the floor if your camera sensor isn't up to it. Right, off we go. And first impressions immediately is that, hey, this looks pretty good. Now I would have said, hey, this looks exactly like a CCD sensor, but that little sort of tearing in the props I think gives it away as something not quite the norm. I don't think a CCD has that tearing on the props like that, where I don't know if it's the frame rate or the way the sensor works, but essentially it's rolling shutter, but not in the sort of jello sense, if you like. Those props are moving too fast for it, so it gets a bit of one every frame and can't quite match them up. But so far so good. Now I did go and compare this later to some CCD cameras, and what I noticed is I felt that the image was a little bit oversaturated. So the blue was just a little bit bright blue and the green was a little bit overly green. But this is just a colour settings thing you can mess with to get it right. When I was flying with it, I wasn't thinking anything other than, well, this looks good. It's only comparing to other cameras you notice the differences. But you'll see here I'm going into the shadows and that dappled light to see how it would work, and it's working really nicely. And I flew down that sort of shadow bit on the way there, and you'll see there was absolutely no problems. The only problems I've got with this quad at the moment is some of this noise I'm getting. I swapped out the VTX recently to test the AKK VTX with a built-in DVR. The previous AKK VTX I had before that was really, really good. This one tends to be a little bit rubbish, and sometimes you get a flickering of the OSD, so I'm going to swap that back later. So the noise is pretty much due to that rather than anything else. So what I liked also about this CMOS sensor is that there is no jello. This isn't a particularly smooth quad. And so if there was any jello there, it's going to come out. Now, full throttle, I can just produce just a little bit of jello if you look very closely, but it's barely there. So, really good. Overall, a good test of this camera. Little bit of jello under real full throttle, but some of that's down to the quad, some of that's maybe down to the sensor. Colours a little bit oversaturated, but generally looking good. Everything is clear and I can see what I'm doing. And I can see detail in the picture, and I like the fact it's 16:9. Obviously in this situation I've stretched the picture out because it only records in 640 by 480. Can't do much about that, and so if things look a little bit stretchy and weird, that's because I'm sort of simulating what was happening in the video editor. Well, I was pretty impressed with that. I never expect too much from a CMOS camera, but I have to say, couldn't really tell in terms of the light handling. Maybe a few telltale signs. The way the props, as they rotated, have that sort of slight shutter, I don't know, shutter lag or something. You get that slight distortion in it. And when I really boosted the throttle, I could get a little bit of jello in it. That might be down slightly to the frame. There was a little bit of difference in colour when I looked between this and a CCD camera, but I thought the picture from it was pretty damn good. And obviously I like the fact that I could use proper 16:9, which I've had to stretch out in their DVR footage, but it looks quite nice. So yeah, a really solid camera. I like the mounting. Yeah, there's lots to like about it. So if you're looking for a camera, check these out, especially if you like 16:9, and the ability to swap between PAL and NTSC is quite good, and that's something you do get out of CMOS, which you can't do in CCD. But what of the other thing? The cable. Does it get me 9 volts to power my goggles? I found my power bank from many years ago, and the power bank is completely dead. So I'm pretending I'm plugging into a power bank, but I'm in fact plugging into a USB mains adapter. But it still supplies 5 volts, so same difference. A little blue LED comes on there. Let's plug into the goggles. Oh look, it turns on. Perfect. Now as I said, fat sharks, you really want to be using the balance lead from a battery to help you run the fan. But for other types of goggles, especially the box goggles, the FXT goggles they obviously have, this is going to come in quite nicely, and it's quite a nice solution because clearly you can pick up these, hopefully better than this one, which didn't really last. You can pick up these power banks fairly cheap now and get fairly big ones for not a lot of money. It's certainly something you can do instead of going down sort of a LiPo battery to an adapter and stuff. So yeah, certainly does the job. Anyway, big thanks to FXT for sending those out for review, and of course there's links down below from where you can get them. And I hope that video was helpful. I will catch you in the next one. Bye for now.
Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.